In the early days of the church, the first Jesus followers were not called Christians, they were called followers of the way. But over the years, Christians have often lost sight of the way Jesus introduced to the world, and it is time we find it again. So in today's episode, I want to begin to show you how. Welcome so much to Journey at Home. If this is your first time, thanks for tuning in. Whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, our goal is to create content that inspires you to take your next step in following Jesus and helps you to live a better life. So hit that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications because we want you to stay connected with us. And then let's get started today, all right? Today we begin a brand new series that I've been waiting for my whole life because I finally get to talk about Jesus and Star Wars together. Any Star Wars fans out there? If you aren't, don't worry. We're not going to geek out here. The Star Wars part's going to be pretty quick. I am a fan of Star Wars partly because the very first movie I ever saw in a theater was when my dad took me to see The Empire Strikes Back. Now, he may not even remember that, but I do, and I have been a fan ever since. And what I think is the greatest parenting achievement I've ever had to date, my son is now an avid Star Wars fan too. So way back in that other lifetime of 2019, before all that pandemic stuff, Disney released a new Star Wars series called The Mandalorian. Maybe you've seen it. You probably, even if you haven't watched it, you've heard of Baby Yoda, otherwise known as Grogu. But James and I are hooked on the entire storyline of The Mandalorian. And one of the interesting aspects of the show is that the Mandalorians have this code of conduct, an ethic, a culture among their people that they aspire to live by. It's like a set of values that guides their thinking and shapes their decisions and informs their lives. So in the show, whenever the Mandalorians are faced with a tough situation and doing the right thing may cost them personally, or whenever they make a choice that other people don't understand, they will look at one another and they'll just say, "This is the way." In other words, this is how we've committed to one another to live our lives. Now, here's the connection between Jesus and the Mandalorians, okay? There is a document that is a part of our Bibles today that we call the Book of Acts, but to call it a book is really a poor choice of words. It's more of a historical account, and it was written by a man named Luke. Now, Luke was a medical doctor who became a follower of Jesus after the resurrection of Jesus, and eventually Luke became a traveling companion of the Apostle Paul. So he documented for us everything that happened to start this movement that we call the church, from the time Jesus rose from the dead in AD 33 all the way to AD 61, which was a span of about 28 years. Now, if you're not familiar with Luke's account, I would highly recommend you read it because it is packed with action. You can read a chapter a day. You can finish it in less than a month. If you're not familiar with it, though, the short version is this. When Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't just disappear. He remained right here on earth for about 6 weeks, 40 days to be exact. And during that time, Jesus interacted with over 500 different people in different places and times. And he did this intentionally because he wanted there to be plenty of credible evidence and plenty of eyewitnesses to his resurrection. So Luke picks the history up right there, and he records for us what these early followers of Jesus did for the next 28 years. All the ups and downs, all the good and bad, and how the movement grew from 120 Jewish people in Jerusalem to thousands of people throughout the Mediterranean Rim. So you read about the activity of Peter and John and James, the brother of Jesus, and you read about the emergence of the Apostle Paul in this church movement. Now, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not is a fascinating read that gives you insight into how the church got started. But one of the interesting things that you find in Acts is that these Jesus followers, they never called themselves Christians. Instead, they were referred to as followers of the way because they were not known for some set of religious beliefs. They were known for adopting a radically new and different way of life that the world had never seen before. It was a way that Jesus introduced into the world, and they had adopted it because of his resurrection. And that way of living turned the Roman Empire upside down. It ultimately changed the world. And it's the same way of life that Jesus calls us to live today because, I'm telling you, it is what our world still needs most. So in this series, we're going to discover some of the unique behaviors that are characteristic of followers of the way. And I want to invite all of us who call ourselves Christians to evaluate whether those behaviors, whether or not they're our way. Because if they're not, we're actually not really following Jesus. We may believe some things, but we're not following the way. And for those of you who aren't Jesus followers, maybe you had a bad church experience and you walked away, or maybe you're skeptical any of this is true. Well, I hope you'll listen in and lean in with some curiosity because my guess is these are behaviors that will resonate with you, and these are behaviors that you wish were true of Christians. even if you've never seen it before. Now, it is important to understand that in the first century, Jesus' followers had no power, no influence, and in most cases, they had very few resources. This was certainly true for the Apostle Paul. When he dramatically changed course from someone who was killing Christians to a Jesus follower, he lost most of his power, his influence, and his resources, but from his point of view, it was worth it. Paul changed because he saw a crucified Jesus alive, and seeing a dead man walking is going to change your outlook on life pretty quickly. And then as Paul began to follow Jesus' way, he discovered it changed his values. It changed how he lived in a really practical way. So, one day Paul sits down to write a letter to people who are living in the city of Ephesus, and he's teaching them how to follow Jesus. And in this letter, he explains the foundation of this new way we're called to live. Paul gives them the guiding principle, if you will, the central questions at the heart of Jesus' way of life, and helps them to know if they're walking in the way. So here's the advice and instruction he gives them. He simply says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Simply put, Paul says the way of Jesus is the way of love, but not just any kind of love. It's the kind of sacrificial, others first love that Jesus demonstrated to us when he gave his life for us. So there's no way to follow the way unless you learn to love this way. Now, I think this is where there's a lot of confusion created today, because love is a value in America. Everybody wants to be loving. People who don't follow Jesus are loving. But Paul is not talking about that normal kind of love. For example, anybody can love people who love them. I mean, you don't have to have Jesus' help to do that. But being part of the way of Jesus means we go beyond that. We love our enemies. We love people who can't do anything for us. We love people who speak negatively about us. Walking in the way of love requires us to live different based on what's most loving for the people around us and not simply what's most appealing to us. Now, Paul goes on to explain this. And remember, he's just talking to those of us who are Jesus followers when he writes this. He says, but among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Now, why are they improper? Well, not because they're on some list of don'ts that are part of a rule book. And you got to follow them to be part of the club. That's not it at all. Paul says there shouldn't be any of this in the life of Jesus followers because sexual immorality, it's not the loving thing to do. It's a selfish thing, not a selfless one. Impurity, that's not what love leads you to do. Greed isn't loving to any of the people around you. See, those behaviors, they're just not part of the way of love. He goes on, he says, nor should there be obscenity or foolish talk or coarse joking, which are out of place. But rather, he says, thanksgiving. Again, not a list of rules. But when you're selflessly loving others, you recognize your words carry weight. Love's not going to harm someone by saying something harsh. Love's going to lead you to watch what you say. Paul says instead of harsh or angry words, love's going to lead you to be grateful. Because can you love without gratitude? Well, no, the two just go hand in hand, don't they? And then Paul adds, for of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Now, I don't want you to get confused about this. Paul didn't say here that immoral or impure or greedy people don't have a relationship with Jesus. He's not saying that they can't spend eternity with God. He's simply saying people with those behaviors won't have any inheritance in God's kingdom. In other words, they aren't living by the way of Jesus, so they're going to miss the rewards of Jesus. They've chosen an inferior way, even though they're aware that there is a better way. Now, what would cause Jesus' followers to do that? Well, according to Paul, it's idolatry. See, idolatry is valuing something or someone more than God. It's why we often choose our way over his, if we're honest. I want what I want more than I want what he invites me to want, And this is Paul's way of warning us not to choose the wrong way. He says, for you were once darkness, but now you're light in the Lord, so live as children of light. And then he describes it. He says, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And he says, so find out what pleases the Lord. Now, here's all he meant by that. When you're following the way of Jesus, these are the behaviors that will be most prominent in your life. You become known for goodness, become known for righteousness, you become known for truth. Goodness means doing good, but not just doing good to those who do good to us. I mean, we should be people who do good to those in need, to do good to those who can't do good to us in return, to do good to our enemies. Paul says that's the way of love. Righteousness means we're people who do justly, who show mercy, who walk humbly, who extend kindness to everyone we meet in every situation. When we're righteous, we live right to and for others. It's the way of love. And then truth means we can be trusted to be truthful at all times, and we can be trusted to be people who speak the truth in love. It's the way of love. Paul says if you want to know what it looks like to follow Jesus, well, this is the way. And this is how you can know you're a follower of Jesus' way. So, for those of us who call ourselves Christians, we pride ourselves on being church people. We love Jesus. Well, let me ask us a question. Which of these behaviors are we most known for? Which behaviors most often describe us? Would the people who know us best and interact with us most describe us as people of goodness, righteousness, truth, gratitude, and love? Or do they more often see immorality or impurity or greed or obscenity? So your actions show what you really follow. They show the way you follow. My behaviors show the true direction I go. So this week, I want to invite you to ask yourself what I think is a powerful question, because it's a question that will guide you to the way of Jesus. Simply ask yourself, what would love lead me to do? In other words, I know what I want to say, but what would love lead me to say? I know how I want to react, but how would love lead me to react? I know what I think I'm entitled to do, but what would love require me to do? If I was walking the way of love, how would I act? Over the next few episodes, we'll discover together exactly what that means we should do. But today, just ask yourself the question, and then choose to let Jesus' way of love lead you. Because, listen, the biggest problem in our community today is not the behavior of people who don't follow Jesus, it's the hypocrisy of those of us who do. Our world needs less people who talk about believing in Jesus and more people who actually follow him. This is the way.